Tonight, we are not in a city of lights, nor in a warm and comfortable home. We are far from electricity, far from central heating, far from rescue. Tonight, we travel back to a time when survival depended not on convenience, but on endurance. A time when winter was not a season, but an enemy. So settle in, lower the lights, and imagine the wind outside your walls is not gentle, but merciless. Because tonight, we step into the frozen world of frontier families, and the coldest nights they ever faced. Imagine it is midnight. The fire is dying. The wind is forcing snow through the cracks of your wooden cabin. Your youngest child is coughing. And outside, the temperature has fallen so low that exposed skin can freeze in minutes. There is no doctor, no backup, no second chance. If the fire goes out, someone may not wake up in the morning. This was not a rare disaster. This was winter. On the frontier was not a romantic place. It was not soft golden sunsets and hopeful piano music. It was distance. Isolation. Silence so complete that even your own breathing felt loud. Families pushed westward or northward chasing land, opportunity, or simple survival, and they built homes in places where nature had never agreed to host them. Their cabins were assembled from raw timber, mud chinking packed between logs, roofs weighed down with sod or wooden shingles, and doors that rarely sealed properly. When winter arrived, those small imperfections became deadly openings. The first snow was almost beautiful. It softened the land and quieted the forests. But as weeks passed, beauty turned to threat. Snowdrifts rose higher than windows. Trails vanished. Rivers froze solid. Supplies that had seemed sufficient in autumn began to shrink in the pantry. Flour, salted pork, dried beans, preserved vegetables, each meal now required calculation. Each scoop taken from a sack meant fewer days ahead. What made the frontier winter truly terrifying was not just the cold. It was the isolation. If illness came, there was no nearby town to run to. If a roof collapsed, there was no neighbor to quickly rebuild it. If a hunting trip failed, there was no grocery store waiting. And yet families endured. Because they had no alternative. Survival began long before the first snowfall. Frontier families prepared obsessively during warmer months. Firewood was life. Entire summers were spent chopping, stacking, drying. A single harsh winter could require several cords of wood, each log carried by hand, split by hand, stacked by hand. If you miscalculated, the consequences arrived in January. Cabins were insulated with whatever was available. Mud, moss, straw, even animal hides nailed over gaps. Windows were small to conserve heat. Some families hung thick quilts over doorways to trap warmth inside a single room. Everyone slept close together, not for affection, but for shared body heat. At night, the fire never truly died. Someone would wake every few hours to feed it. Often it was the father, sometimes the mother. Sleep was broken and shallow. The fear was constant. If the embers faded and no one noticed, the temperature inside the cabin could plummet before dawn. And the cold was not passive. It crept. It tightened joints. It cracked skin until hands bled. It froze water buckets solid inside the house. Sometimes even ink in pens would harden. Metal tools burned the skin like ice. Children learned early that winter was not to be played with. Frostbite could take fingers. Hypothermia could take lives quietly, gently, without drama. The frontier did not shout its danger. It whispered it. As winter deepened, hunger became the silent companion of cold. Hunting grew difficult when animals migrated or hid. Traps had to be checked despite blizzards. Fishing required cutting through thick river ice. Every calorie burned outside had to be worth the risk. Meals became simpler. Thinner soups. Smaller portions. Bread stretched with ground corn or whatever grain remained. Sometimes bark was ground into flour in extreme cases. Sometimes livestock had to be slaughtered earlier than planned, reducing future survival chances for immediate need. Children felt hunger most sharply. Their growing bodies required more than the frontier could always give. Mothers would often pretend to eat less, quietly pushing more food toward their children. Fathers rationed themselves to maintain strength for labor, but many grew gaunt as winter wore on. And then there were the nights when the wind howled so violently that the cabin trembled. Snow forced itself through cracks. The fire struggled. The roof creaked. In those moments, families sat awake together, listening to nature attempt to claim their fragile shelter. Mourning did not always guarantee relief. Sometimes it revealed damage. Cold weakened immune systems. Malnutrition worsened vulnerability. And when sickness entered a frontier cabin, it spread quickly in the cramped space. There were no pharmacies. Remedies were herbal, improvised, or based on passed-down knowledge. Fever was treated with cool cloths. Coughs were soothed with homemade syrups. But pneumonia in sub-zero conditions was often fatal. Imagine caring for a sick child while the temperature outside is far below freezing. The fire must be kept strong, yet wood is limited. Water must be melted from snow. Bedding must be kept dry. And sleep becomes nearly impossible. Sometimes the snow was so deep that travel was physically impossible. If a family member was near death, neighbors could not always reach them in time. Frontier graveyards often grew during winter. And yet, even through loss, families stayed. Because leaving meant starting again. And winter did not wait for relocation. Cold is not only physical. It is psychological. Weeks of grey sky. Limited sunlight. Endless white landscapes. Silence broken only by wind. Cabin fever was real and dangerous. Children grew restless. Adults grew irritable. Small arguments could feel magnified in confined quarters. To fight this, families created structure. Daily chores. Storytelling by firelight. Reading from precious books. Singing softly. Teaching lessons. Hope became a survival tool. They marked days on walls. They watched the sun's angle shift gradually. They spoke of spring planting as if speaking it into existence. And sometimes, in the darkest part of winter, when supplies were lowest and spirits were thin, resilience became almost spiritual. A belief that endurance itself was a virtue. That surviving the night was an achievement. And so they endured. Not because they were fearless, but because fear was not useful. Winter did not end dramatically. It loosened its grip slowly. Snow melted unevenly. Mud replaced ice. Rivers broke free with violent cracks. The air softened. Cabins opened their doors again. Families stepped outside into pale sunlight, thinner than before, wearier than before, but alive. They counted what they had lost. Livestock. Supplies. Sometimes loved ones. But they also counted what they had proven. They had survived. The frontier did not reward comfort. It rewarded preparation, discipline, cooperation, and relentless will. And perhaps that is why frontier stories endure today. Not because they are cozy, but because they remind us of a time when warmth was earned, food was precious, and every sunrise after a freezing night was a quiet victory. So the next time you feel the heater turn on automatically, remember, there was a time when someone had to wake at midnight to keep the fire alive.